everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we're going to be talking about something I haven't really addressed before. We're going to be discussing the concept of breaking a submissive. Where does this idea come from? Is it a good idea? Why do people do it? Is it dangerous? We're going to be going over all of that. And it was something that was a very popular term for a while. I feel like it's less popular now, but it is still very much a thing. Now, what comes to mind for me when I think of breaking a submissive, I think of two key things. One, I think of, frankly, kinky erotica. I think of the kind of story where you have a big, strong, but kind of dark, domly dom man, and then a new but strong-willed would-be sub, and then the dom comes along into the submissive's life and then just sweeps them away into like some kinky basement, penthouse suite, whatever type thing somewhere, and then, the sub has all this really strong will, and she's so forceful, and she doesn't want to do this, but then, of course, he ends up winning her over and forcing her, like, literally with pain and fear and everything else to become submissive, and then eventually she gives in, and well, wouldn't you know it, at the exact moment she loses all of her willpower to keep resisting him, and she finally, gives in totally. That's when she realizes, oh, I wanted to really be a sub all along, and then she's like perfectly content just going along with whatever he wants for now and forever. Happy ending, supposedly, right? That's the core of it. And then the second thing that I think of is people that are newer to kink, typically people that are online that don't necessarily fully understand what it's like to have a real life, in-person, full-time DS relationship, because their exposure has oftentimes been only through things like fiction or through internet roleplay. They don't really know what it's like to actually be a sub or a dom, and the level of commitment and emotional responsibility that takes. And so naturally, their approach to DS is, okay, whatever the most intense, most extreme thing I've read that I like, whatever that is, that's my goal for doing kink. And so having this kind of fantasy where you're being broken or breaking people, that's the pinnacle of doing DS. That's what I need to do. And if I run across a dom, I have to tell them, I want you to break me, because that's what they're expecting. And so it's about a warped perspective of what goes into the typical DS relationship oftentimes, and it is usually within power exchange and DS relationships. And I do think this can also bleed out into real life interactions too. I remember some of my early kink experiences were being around doms that had very similar mentalities to this, where I, was in the scene and I was new, and then somebody found out that I was young and new and didn't really have any experience but wanted to be a submissive, and then they would go, well, if you want to be a true sub, you have to be broken, you have to be molded by your dom into this exact thing, and like it was talked about in this very extreme way. And I was lucky in that my red flag radar went off, and I was like, oh, I don't know about that. That sounds a little bit too extreme, but not everyone has the knowledge or the internal sense of like red flags to be able to go, okay, that sounds a little bit not necessarily realistic. And with what it means to break a submissive, from what I can glean from researching this, it seems like for the most part, breaking in this sense is about having an approach to starting a DS relationship, typically, where the S-type is compelled and forced into being a submissive for that dominant partner, typically being controlled with fear and pain and just, being completely beaten down and no longer being allowed to have a will or independent thought. And I think, I just thought of this, because a lot of the origins of the kink scene, going way back to like the early gay men's leather culture, like there is a degree of military influence over kink, and also things like, horse training and stuff as well, because a lot of the popular early stories about BDSM had horses and ponies in them. And I think maybe a lot of this might be connected to sort of that idea of when you were going to basic or you're in boot camp and the drill sergeant has to break you down for you to kind of get out of your civilian headspace and like become a soldier. And then people think, I'm gonna do that with my kink partner. What could possibly go wrong? And it's like, well, most of the time, DS and submission is based on mutual respect and care and desire. And it's much more like this process of the Dom is here and the sub is here, and the Dom's kind of leading the way for where the sub is gonna go, but it's an ebb and a flow, right? Like there's sort of a sense of the pressure and like, oh, can I really push this far? Can I go here? Like, where should I be leading based on that feedback, and having it flow smoothly in a way that we both want it to, as opposed to like breaking where it's like, I'm gonna make you do this and you're gonna go here because I said so. And bits of that can certainly be very hot, but as a basis for a whole relationship, I'm not necessarily convinced. And I don't want to yuck anybody's yum here. I don't want to say no one should do this. And I do want to recognize that for a lot of people, this is their core kink. This fantasy is why they are interested in having DS relationships. So with that in mind, is there a way you can do this in a safer fashion? Why is this kind of fantasy so common, and maybe what roots are causing this to come up, and how can we have DS relationships that are addressing those root desires without necessarily maybe the more pernicious implications of something that's breaking along the lines of what you would see in a more like extreme dark erotica, And while I was researching this topic to find that answer, I discovered that, very interestingly, this seemed to be a hot topic specifically in the years of 2012 and 2013, which is a couple years before I was in the scene, and there were all kinds of blog articles about it and people going back and forth, and people had opinions about breaking a submissive 10 years ago. And I think it's calmed down since then, but getting to have all of those conversations recorded online was really helpful, because I was able to see in those blogs a little bit of a breakdown of why people want this fantasy, of the reasons behind why this is so compelling for some people. And I want to quote from one of the blogs I found that I think did a really good job of explaining this. For me, it conjures the image of a wild horse, the animal being roped. She struggles, fighting wildly against it, eventually calming only to have a rider on her back. The sensation, odd at first, she bucks fiercely trying to knock the rider off. After several times she calms, relaxing into it, accepting the rider. Eventually it sinks in. She intrinsically understands it is hopeless to effect a change. She becomes dependent on her owner, who feeds her, washes her down after a ride, and she remains fiercely loyal to her owner. The horse is broken, but has gained a greater purpose and service to her owner. It is important to keep reminding oneself, women are not horses. Few submissives consider that when they whisper to their dominant they want to be, quote, broken. When a sub first asked me to, many years ago, it made me feel an odd combination of pride and simultaneously fear. Fear, it should be mentioned, to a sadist is rather like catnip, an intoxicating combination. It demonstrates complete trust. However, what are they really saying? Do they want to be shattered, humiliated, and abused? I do not believe so. What they're asking is far more simplistic. They are begging to be controlled. They are asking to have their deepest secrets revealed and brought to light. They are begging for their walls not to be torn down but demolished. They crave containment and to feel safe. The path to that is never easy, and if I am honest, it will remain elusive for most who dare to ask. And I agree with all of that. I think especially the horse analogy really illustrates the way that a lot of people think about this internally. And absolutely, I think there are people who consider this breaking process to be almost a kind of cheat code for submission. Not that it makes it easy, but it's a way to go, okay, I can get to complete, total, perfect submission. I can know my dom will like everything that I'm doing everything right, everything's okay, and that can feel very secure and very safe. And a lot of people that are drawn towards submission are looking for relationships where they have that. As part of the appeal of submission is knowing exactly where your place is and that you are doing the right thing in your relationship. I would also add, I think a lot of people are also drawn to breaking, not just for the security and the comfort of it, but also because, almost opposite in a way, they want to be pushed. They want to have their limits pushed. They want to become more and harder, and being broken down completely is a way to get to that, of having that deeper level of submission, of having their boundaries pushed or outright not respected at all, and to have that area where they can resist and fight back, but ultimately also be overcome. And I wonder a little bit, is maybe this desire for becoming a broken submissive and having that narrative of being willful and strong initially and then being overcome and overpowered, is that sort of a bratting before bratting was a common term thing? Like, is this why a lot of older people in the scene are very averse to brats, because they think that when somebody is bratting, they're like faking doing the breaking process because they never actually really get fully broken. They just role play doing the breaking over and over and over again without it actually sticking. I don't have any evidence for that being the case, but I do wonder if there is that connection for at least some people. But outside of the thrill of being totally controlled, what else might the process of being broken offer to a submissive? What is part of the reason why people do this? And one of the other articles that I read while I was researching this seemed to indicate that at least part of it was to sort of clear out the remaining remnants from previous relationships to be able to have a fresh start. To me, the process of breaking a sub or slave is a matter of dismantling former habits and possible traumas or malfunctions instilled by a former D-type who messed up, or in another context, simply a matter of deconstructing the submissive and rebuilding them through a process of behavioral and protocol training that is deeply rooted around the needs of the dynamic and the parties involved. So it sounds like breaking can be more than just compelling the submissive to be submissive and forcing them to be that way. It can also be about using the DS relationship as a way to clear out old bad stuff. It can be a way of improving somebody's behavior or getting rid of bad habits or improving their mental or physical well-being. And I think that's a feature of most people's DS relationships. And it's so common, we already use a different word for it. We usually call that training, which is the process of teaching an S-type how the dominant expects them to behave. And that can be just within the relationship, but it can also have more far-reaching effects over the submissive's whole life, how they interact with their people, even their work, their sleeping patterns, how they dress, how they present themselves to the world. It can go quite deep, and all of that usually, in my experience at least, is typically called training. And so it seems then we have two competing meanings of breaking. We have people who mean it in the sense of completely destroying somebody and then building them back up from scratch, and then we have the idea that it is more about guiding the S-type in a certain way, helping them develop better habits. It's totally positive and mutual and wanted. And this isn't even getting into the fact that there are people who not only have these two separate definitions, they also delineate between breaking and breaking in, which I do also want to talk about. So for breaking in, I feel like that maps much more onto the more positive, training-focused use of the word breaking. Where breaking in, as it kind of brings to mind, it's about having something be slowly eased into in the way that you ease into wearing new leather or new shoes, where you are going about it in an intentional way, slowly, so that way you can build something up, get to the point you want to get to, but you don't go too fast because you want to preserve the original thing that you have. You don't want to go so fast that you risk ruining the very thing that you just spent all this time on. And so it's a much more slow, intentional process that's not really about breaking down. And then with breaking, of course, again, it's that whole, force and control, and it's much more intense. The key differences I can see between the terms training and breaking in really have to do with the expectations of the people that are choosing one of these words or phrases over the other. And I think a lot of it has to do with what they think will happen if they ask for that thing, the role play flavor of it, and the extent to which they think it will change their life. Like with breaking, that feels much more total and complete and absolute. It would be like if you had a house on some land and then you completely demolished the whole house down to the foundation, you completely got rid of all of it, and then you went, okay, I want to build this house here. And it ends up being potentially totally different from what you originally had on that land. Whereas with training or breaking in, I think that feels more like you are keeping the house as it is right now, but you're changing certain features of it. You're adding wallpaper or changing appliances or painting a room. Maybe you're turning one of the spaces in the garage into a work area or a workbench or something. And you are keeping the bones of the house the same, but you are changing it a little bit to please the new owner and what they like to see in their house, And so I think in reality, if you want to do something that's more like breaking in the conventional sense of, okay, we are completely overtaking your will, we are going to replace everything that you are with what the dominant wants you to be. If that's what your core desire is, I think the way to do that in a healthier way is more kind of like the middle point between these two fantasies or these two ideas with like the house analogy, where you are doing more than just changing the paint color, but you're also not demolishing everything. You're like maybe tearing down a wall to make it more open or adding on a sunroom. Like you're doing big modifications that change the foundation and like the skeleton of the house, but the core house you started with is still mostly there. And so basically I think there is a way to balance both of these needs of you want to have this total and complete rebirth almost in your submission, and also like wanting to be safe and like have a happy, healthy relationship. And I think that's a better way to do it, where you go more slow and intentional. And I think the way that most people do it that I've seen is they start out with a DS relationship, not on the premise that it will be this like total, complete wiping of everything the sub is before they get there, but that the goal over time is to change more and more, and that gets constantly reevaluated the deeper into the relationship you go. And maybe they start off thinking in the DS relationship, okay, we're gonna change just these like 3 things, and then you change that and that feels really good, and then you renegotiate and you go from there. And the point is that you don't start from this place of like just completely being like, all right, I've never done BDSM before, completely change me as a person in ways that could not be undone in the future. That sounds like a great idea. Tattoo me, do whatever. And I just think that can be your fantasy, and you don't have to start there, and it might not be the best idea to start there if you've never done any level of BDSM before, because it doesn't matter what it is. It can be impact play, power exchange, bondage. Almost always your fantasy is more extreme than what you will actually want to do when you start doing it in person. You can think, oh, I want to do a total body encasement for 12 hours and then be left in a room and stepped on, and it's like, you can start with that idea, and then in the moment you get into a sleep sack and go, whoa, claustrophobia, not fun, not good, I don't like this. So as always, going slowly is the best option. But also, DS relationships come in all shapes and sizes, and for some people, they need to be a firm hand. They want to have a firm hand as the submissive. They want to receive that. And if you asked them to do anything differently other than that, that would be deeply unfulfilling, and it wouldn't be fun for them, and they wouldn't want to do kink. And so for people that are in that camp of they want this or nothing, I think you have to be aware of the risks of what you were asking to have done and how much responsibility you are putting on the other partner when you're doing that. And then be very selective with the person you do this with. I think the trade-off is you have to accept that if you want that type of relationship, you might be waiting for years for the right person to come along. You're probably not going to get lucky first time out looking for somebody and then find the perfect, ideal, compatible partner that also has the skill, experience, and confidence necessary to make this happen well. And I think also it would be helpful to evaluate those underlying desires you have when you say, I want to be broken. Is that like a hot role play thing? Is that a pony play thing? Is that I want to be totally safe and secure thing, or I want to have my limits and boundaries pushed? Because there are ways to meet all of those needs without having to do complete total personality renovation like you're on some kind of HGTV show for your brain. Like that's, you don't have to go that far that quickly. But really, I think at the end of the day, y'all can choose what you want to do. I think for me, I would potentially like to see maybe some additional language here, maybe a new different words that we can separate between breaking and like the more positive but deeper level of training that I think people are looking for. Like, yes, breaking does happen, but also this other form of it where it's about teaching you new things and personal growth. Maybe we could call that like molding or behavior shaping or deep training, maybe, to represent how this oftentimes does go a step farther than just the sort of training that people do where it's like, you must call me sir or ma'am, or you must kneel when we are in the living room or something, you know, where it's beyond just those kind of little moments in a relationship and about deep things that can go beyond just your individual brief interactions, you know? But it's a very interesting subject because I have seen people use the term a lot as sort of this representation of what ideal kink looks like, and like that it's a fundamental part of doing a DS relationship is step one, breaking your sub. And it's like, well, okay, wait, let's back up here. Let's evaluate what that means first and what we're really saying when we say that. So anyways, that's everything that I wanted to share today about breaking and breaking in a submissive. I would love to hear your thoughts in a comment down below. If you use this, if you've seen it before, what you think about it, what you would maybe say instead. If you, like me, think maybe having a different word here that sounds less extreme is maybe more accurate. And again, let me know your thoughts in a comment down below. If you enjoyed this, if you're not already, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best you can do is Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.